Hello, tiny friends. Welcome back to Tiny Keyhole Minis. I'm Jolene, and today is part 2 of the miniature photo frames. Now, I've already placed my portraits in my frames, and I'm going to put a paper backing on them. I like to use this brown craft paper, and I get this from my local Dollar Tree. I believe you can find it at Walmart as well, or even online. It's just like a brown craft or wrapping paper. It looks like a wrapping paper roll and you get plenty of it. Sometimes I get this stuff inside the wrapping paper, like Christmas wrapping paper. They'll have this in as the tube for it. And sometimes they'll have a thicker brown craft paper. I love to save that stuff because it comes in really handy. Now, you don't have to use this brown craft paper, but I do suggest using a paper to back your photo frames, whether you're doing a mirror or a decorative picture or portraits. I suggest backing it with a piece of paper because it secures your photo or your picture in the frame, and it makes it a little easier to stick to the walls, whether you're using glue or you're using a mini hold or a tacky or some sort of museum wax. It just helps with securing your photos in your frames, securing them to the wall, and giving them a finished look. I taped my piece down to my mat so that it would stay nice and flat and keep it from rolling. But I'm going to go ahead and glue all the frames onto this sheet at one time. So I'm just using my tacky glue for this. I'm just going to put a good amount on. I'm not putting too much on. I'm not doing excessive gluing today, but I do want to make sure that I have a nice even layer and that the glue goes from edge to edge, corner to corner, and covers the entire back completely. So I'm going to take my toothpick and just spread a nice even layer down, and this will keep that brown paper nice and smooth, keep it from wrinkling up or maybe getting too wet from the glue. It'll just have a nice smooth finish in the end. So I'm making sure that I'm covering the exposed frame that the photo paper is not covering so that the brown paper seals completely and doesn't lift up in any of the areas later on. And then I'm just going to lay it down nice and flat. Put a little pressure on it for a couple minutes. Now I am going to add some weight to these. I like to use a heavy bottle of paint, and I usually just tip it upside down because the cap is nice and flat and it just has more of an even weight if I tip it upside down. Now I can only do a few of the photos at a time because I only have so many bottles. So I'll do a few at a time. I'll just move the bottles around the frames, but I am going to do all of the frames before cutting any of these out. I do want to say this is a very tedious job, and I can only do photos and frames in batches because it's just so much work and trying to size the photos and figure out which photos are going to go in what frames and then placement of the photos. So don't overwhelm yourself. Just do a handful at a time. These ones I have done previously a while back, and they had some tacky wax on them, but that's what the back will pretty much look like. This is a metal photo frame. It didn't need a backing because the photo actually slides inside. It did have a back on it, but I took the back off so that I can hang it on the wall. And some of these had wire on them to hang from. So I'm going to be adding some wire to some of them. And I'm also going to be adding, I think, some chain. So I'm just pushing these photos down, just making sure that they're nicely glued down and that they're pretty dry before I begin to cut them out. Once they're nice and dry, I can begin to cut them apart. Now, I'm not doing a precise cut at this moment. I'm just cutting them all apart from one another. Okay, a couple of these frames have areas where you can see through to the back. I didn't glue those spaces. I only glued around the photo paper so that when I trim the excess paper off, you'll still be able to see through to the back. So for this, I'm using my scissors, and you can very well use your scissors to cut all the excess paper off of your frames. And you can also just peel back the brown paper or your paper from where it isn't glued if it starts to get a little too tight and you want to get a little closer of a cut. So peeling that paper back will just make it a little easier to trim it away. And I'm just trimming it away a little at a time. It doesn't have to be perfect because you're not going to really see the back because they're going to be attached to the wall. So this is the other frame that I'm doing this on. It has areas where you can actually see through the frame. So I'm just rolling back the paper with my fingers and just pushing it back, and it just makes it a little bit easier. It sticks the paper up and just makes it a little easier to trim away. You can also use an emery board to carefully file away any paper that's hanging over the edge that you couldn't get close enough to trim away, but you do want to be careful because it is paper. I prefer to use my craft knife, so I switched over. And if you're using a craft knife, you want to make sure you have a super sharp or brand new blade. It gives it more of a cleaner cut. I'm kind of angling my blade inward a little. You just want to make sure that you're taking your time when doing this because you don't want to cut your frame. You can easily cut pieces of your frame, especially if they're clay. So you just want to be very careful, take your time, do small cuts at a time when you're going around a border that has lots of movement to it and isn't just a straight cut. But I think it's quicker than the scissors, and I think it just gives it a cleaner, closer cut. If you do choose to use a craft knife, you just want to make sure that your blade is nice and sharp or brand new so that your paper has nice clean cuts on the edge and they're not shredded and ripped up because you don't want that. But choose to use whatever's best for you. Okay, I'm going to use my scrap wire. These are all just scrap cuts from previous projects. Some of the wire is painted and some of it isn't. I'm just finding whatever I have. You could probably use a paper clip as well for this. And I'm just taking my needle nose pliers and bending it in the middle, kind of like a triangle, and just attaching it to some of the photo frames. This just helps to give that added detail because I don't want all my frames to look like they're stuck on the wall the same way. So I just chose a few that I can add the wires to. Okay, so I'm going to use this costume jewelry. I think this is an earring, and it's just got a bunch of chains on it. And I'm going to add some chains to a couple of the photo frames as well, in the same way that I added the wire. Okay, tiny friends, let's look at the portraits that will be going on the wall. This is a portrait of Miss Margot's husband when he was a little boy, and I believe I have had this photo in my miniature stash since the 90s. I think this was one of the first miniatures that I ever purchased. Here is another little photo of Miss Margot's husband when he was an infant, and I actually found that photo in one of her boxes in the attic. This is a photo of my grandmother and her brother when they were younger, and she was my nanny. I never really knew her brother because he passed before my time. Here is a photo of Miss Ophelia. She is the second doll that I sculpted, and we just recently saw her in the video when I was redoing the carpet on the stairs. Miss Ophelia is no longer with us. She has gone off to live her new life in her new home, and I miss her already. So I wanted to make sure that I had some photos of her on the wall, and I do have some more of her coming up. Here is a photo of Miss Margot in her sewing room, listening to her favorite records. And of course, I had to have some portraits of Miss Margot since she does live in the Josephine house. Here is another photo of Miss Margot with her big smile showing her pearly white teeth. And I thought this was hilarious. I put a filter on her and it gave her a big smile with teeth. I wonder what Miss Ophelia would look like with teeth. I've got to try that. That would probably be hilarious. So funny. I really do want to try sculpting a doll with teeth like this. So I do plan to try and do that. Here's a photo of my little Nutter Butter. He is our recent grandson. Oh gosh, he's just a dream. He looks like a little farmer. This photo is of my mother and my uncle when they were kids, and I just love this photo. Here's another photo of Miss Margot. Now, for those of you that are new to my channel or not really familiar with Miss Margot, she's the first doll that I sculpted. She's the old battle axe that lives in the Josephine house. This picture is of her sitting in her chair. She was probably soaking her feet. Here's another photo of Miss Ophelia. She was saying goodbye to Miss Margot, and I did take some photos of them together, so you'll probably see those later on in the house. Now this is a nice portrait of my great Gram when she was older, and she's the little girl on the pony. Here's a picture of my first grandson. This is my little Bubba, and he's seeing Santa for the first time. Oh, here's a photo of Miss Margot's mother who had a twin sister. So this is her and her twin sister. I actually printed this one from the internet. Here's a wedding photo of my grandmother, my nanny, and my grandfather, who was actually a Paumia. So he was a prisoner of war and missing in action. So he never came home from the war, and that was the Korean War. This is a photo of my aunt, and she was 3 years old visiting Santa. And I just love that I have these two pictures of both of them visiting with Santa. They're both looking up at Santa in the same kind of position. And I always said my little Bubba reminds me so much of my aunt. They always had like the same facial expressions. They kind of reminded me of a classic Christmas movie like A Miracle on 34th Street. This is a picture of my Aunt Myrtle. And oh gosh, she was a character. She was definitely an old battle axe. And I almost named Miss Margot after her. And then Grammy passed on, and I just knew she had to be a Margot after Grammy. Aunt Myrtle and Nani were best friends, and they would sit on the porch together all day and gossip and just cackle like a bunch of old hens. They were a hoot together. This is Grammy when she was making her first communion, and Grammy is my beloved mother-in-law. This photo is of her mother, and she lost her mother at a young age. I believe she was only 8 years old. But this is a beautiful portrait from the 20s of her mother. Here's another photo of Grammy's mother, and I just wanted to include her on the portrait wall. For one, because she was very dear to Grammy, and for two, Grammy was very dear to me, and the pictures are just beautiful. Here's an old photo of my great aunt with my Gram, which was her mother. My great aunt Barb was my mother's aunt, my nanny's sister. And I know some of these photos are not in the same date and time as Miss Margot's life, but I still wanted to include as many of my family members as I could that have moved on and passed on. These two photos are of my great-grandfather, my nanny's father. He left my Gram to go on the road. He was a musician, and he was also a veteran. He left my Gram with 6 kids and wasn't in their life, so I never got to know him, but I thought that these photos could play a part of Miss Margot's husband's story. So that's why I'm including them, and I just think they're super neat. So Miss Margot's husband was a musician, and you will see some of his instruments around later on. These next group of photos that I'm going to show you are actually my extended in-laws, and they have photos going back generations and generations of their family members, and I thought they were perfect to add to the dollhouse. So these were photos that were on their walls, and I have taken pictures of them and shrunk them down to mini size. So these photos are so old, and I don't know too many people that have photos this old of their family members. So I thought that was a great, precious thing to still have and include them in my dollhouse journey. Here's a photo of an old Southern church that Miss Margot used to attend that is no longer active, and I thought she would like a photo of her church since it meant so much to her and she grew up going to this church with her family members. I believe today the church is still standing as a historical monument. This photo is of the old farmhouse that I used to live in upstate New York, and it was built in 1875. It still had the servant bells in it. It was a 5-bedroom house with 1 bathroom. The bathroom was downstairs on the first floor, and so was Grammy's bedroom, and it was perfect because she was right next to the bathroom and didn't have to climb the stairs. The stairs were very steep. It was a very old house. There was 4 bedrooms upstairs, and I fell down the stairs many times. There's 2 doors in the front. One goes to the living room and one was no longer active. There's also a mud room in the back that was added onto the house that goes off from the kitchen. This section here is the kitchen, and there was a dining room and then a living room. I loved this house so much, and I have so much inspiration from this house that goes into the Josephine house. Matter of fact, I'll be adding a mudroom on the kitchen of the Josephine house. I love this picture of this house because this tree here was not there when I moved in, and it's sitting at the end of the driveway, looks like near the mailbox. So I really like that this tree was in this picture. This is an older picture of the house. The kitchen, off the kitchen was a pantry that had the washer and dryer, so I didn't have to go in the basement, but the basement door was also in the pantry, and it was an old dirt floor basement with a well. There was a well in there. And there was an old man that used to live here that actually had a workshop in the basement. So there was remnants left of the workshop, and he actually had a train model that he built, and that was his craft. And in one of the bedrooms, it was the whole train model. It was one of those tables where a piece of it lifted up, and then you can go on the inside and be in the middle of it. So that was really interesting. But I did a lot of research on this house, and the family owned a lot of land at the time they lived in this house. They also owned the house next door. So some of the family lived in the house next door. This house sat on quite a few acres of land, and then over time, the land was split up and sold individually. When I moved in it, it was sitting on about a quarter to a half of acres of land. I've had to shovel that driveway many times in the winter, and that was a huge job. So I started calling the plow company. I did feel really sad about leaving this house, but I had to relocate to another state for my grandkids. So this photo deserves to be in the Josephine house forever, from one farmhouse to another. Okay, tiny friends, now it's time to put these photos into place. Now, I already knew that I wanted to put this picture here above the kitchen door, so I'm actually using glue for this one because it's such a heavy metal and there's a magnet on the back. It's got a lot of weight to it, and I didn't want it to fall off. But I am going to be using museum wax or mini hold for the rest of the portraits in case I want to move them around and add more to the wall. I can rearrange them. Okay, tiny friends, I did leave some room on this wall for some more photo frames, which I do have coming in. I also have some new molds, and I can move them around a bit, so there's still more room to add more. I placed the church photo on the back wall. Now for the phone wall, I placed the farmhouse there for now, but I do have a few more farmhouse photos going up on this side wall. I hope you have enjoyed this video today, and if you have, please click that like button and give it a thumbs up. As usual, I want to thank all my subscribers and welcome to all my new subscribers. Thank you so much for coming along with me and all your support. I think these portraits really give this wall a finished look. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And if you're new to my channel and subscribing, please don't forget to hit that tap bell notification button so that you don't miss any of my new projects coming up. I like to thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a lovely day. Until next time, tiny friends, I will see you all on the mini side. Bye-bye.